thing is clear: they hate God. We just recently did a sermon series based on a movie, God's Not Dead. And if many of you remember this movie, there was a student who was a devout Christian, and he's taking a philosophy class. And the professor of this philosophy class is at war with God. And this professor asks all the students to write it down on a sheet of paper, that God is dead, so that he can move past this part of the course and get to what he calls the more interesting part. Well, there was this one student who would not abide by the request, and as a result, he had to debate the professor about the existence of God. All along, the professor was promoting his idea that there is no God, but as the movie plays out, we find out that that really isn't an accurate reflection of his beliefs. It really wasn't an issue of whether there was a God or not, but rather, as it turns out, he believed there was a God. He was just angry with God. And this came out in the very climax of the movie. They were in the middle of their public debate in front of the class, and the student asked the professor, "Why do you hate God?" And the professor initially didn't want him to give an answer, but he kept being provoked by the student, and finally the professor blurts out, and it had to do with a slow and painful death of a close family member. He was angry at God for the way that someone he had loved had to suffer through pain. And in his hatred, he battles with God. And he's trying to turn as many away from him as possible. But all along, he's on the surface saying there is no God, but in reality, he was just angry with God. And to be angry at someone means that that someone really exists. Now, this is a fictitious story, but I believe it is very true to life, because I've had a similar experience, a similar discussion. I've had a series of discussions over a 2-3 year period with someone who at that time said they used to believe, and now they denied the existence of God. They said God does not exist. And some of the things that came out of his mouth would truly make you cringe. In fact, I was afraid to sit next to him because I didn't want to get caught in the crossfire in the event that a bolt of lightning came and struck him down. And speaking with this person, I'm just going to give him the name Pete for the discussion. I wanted to defend God's honor, and I might try to say things to Pete, but he just wouldn't listen. And his anger was unmistakable. So finally, I quit debating with Pete, and finally I just told him, "You're angry. And it's nothing greater than that. You're angry, and you can't be angry at nothing. You're angry at God. It's not that you don't believe there's a God, it's just that you don't like God. You don't like the way he's treating you. You think he should be much kinder." So we broke off our discussions for a while. They weren't leading anywhere, but it was a few years later we did get back together, and he did admit to me, he says, "Yes, I know there is a God. And the problem is that I was angry with God." But he came to the realization it was his problem and not God's problem, and he actually came back to faith and was a believer the last time that I talked to him. But you look around us, and it's for sure we can see that the world hates God. And many are angry with God. I know some atheists out there point to him as a tyrant, and I've shared this quote before. It's a famous quote from Richard Dawkins, who is one of the most outspoken atheists and speakers around, and this is from his book, The God Delusion, and he describes God in this way: "The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction." He's referring to the Bible there, fiction. "Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Speak about lightning and keeping clear. Challenging words. And you know, as I've been hitting the internet, they are changing their tactics. They used to just say, let's just get along. I'm okay, you're okay. Let's just agree to disagree, and that's fine. But now they are becoming more proactive, and they're out there attacking Christians, and they're out there trying to convert people to their view of belief. And so the landscape seems to be changing. And one of their approaches is to take Bible verses and put them on billboards. And I want to share one today. Slaves, they're sharing this, the Colossians 3, verse 22, slaves, obey your masters. And they put this particular picture with it. Feel like you got kicked in the gut? You know, I initially chose, when I came across this picture, I wasn't going to show it today. It was just too powerful. And I really had concern for the impact that it might have. But as I was preparing last night and doing the final touches, I looked at the message, and without this picture, it just seemed empty. The point is the attacks are real. And the challenges are great. Our kids will be seeing this and experiencing this in life, and I'd rather them to be exposed to it here where we can discuss it rather than them have to face this for the first time out in the world. Now, this billboard does have some problems. I think the first thing, when you look at this question, you do have to ask, what was slavery like back then? And I did a little bit of research on this last night, and there are disagreements among scholars exactly what slavery meant. But while there are disagreements, and they're pretty severe disagreements between the biblical scholars, there is one thing that they agree on, and that is that the slavery back then is different than the slavery that we know it here as it was in the United States. For one, it was not racial. Number two, it seemed to be more related to economics. I think sometimes the word slave gets translated bondservant, and it was to the effect of someone becoming so much indebted that they were unable to repay their debt, and they were legally then responsible then to serve as a master. And so it is clear that the idea of a slave is different back then than it is now, and to put that Bible passage with this picture, well, at best we could say it was unscholarly because clearly the scholarship has indicated that it had a different meaning back then. But at worst, I think they don't really care to know what it meant back then, and they don't want to know because they want to be able to smear Christianity with words like this. But nonetheless, that is a challenging Bible verse. And there are going to be more Bible verses that they will publicize that are going to challenge us. And so my question to you is, how do we resolve issues like this when they come up? As I was pondering this, I was taken back to my high school chemistry class. I remember we were studying the gas laws. And there's a formula. You high schoolers, tell me if I remembered this right. PV equals nRT. Is that okay? I did remember that correctly. And they would give us these chemistry questions, and they would give you all these knowns, and you had to take those knowns and figure out the unknowns. And it was really confusing. I was really struggling with this. And finally, someone gave this advice. He says, start with what you know. So what you do is you read the question, you write the formula, PV equals nRT, and then you look at what they give you, the knowns, you plug that into your equation, and once you plug that into the equation, the things that are not plugged into are the unknowns. And then you just mathematically go through, and with that starting point, you can figure the unknown. And I think this is a good way to approach our Bible passages. When we come to a Bible passage where it's unknown, we're just not clear, what was God doing? What does he really mean? It's a little bit ambiguous. Where we need to start is start with what we do know.